celebrating and showcasing some of the most amazing people around the world who are doing incredible things to make our world a better place. This is CUTV News. I'm Jim Masters. Thanks for joining us. You know, according to recent research, up to 70% of employees in the average workplace are disengaged. And of those 70%, 51% are looking for a new job on the company dime, which leaves the remaining 30% carrying the entire load. Not a winning scenario for any company. Today on CUTV News, we celebrate Melissa Porterfield. With almost 20 years of corporate human resource experience, Melissa knows firsthand how critical an organization's people are to its success. Throughout her career, she's held roles ranging from training manager to vice president of people and culture. She has served in an advisory capacity to the C-suite with a focus on creating solutions for all aspects of human capital management, including corporate culture, development, coaching and consulting, organizational development, change management, learning and development, and mergers and acquisitions for both private and publicly held companies. Melissa Porterfield is the founder of Silk Mountain, a boutique consultancy firm based in Houston, Texas, dedicated to helping startups and mid-sized companies clarify their vision, mission, and values to build healthy and sustainable organizational cultures. Her vision is to put culture at the forefront of growing businesses. And her mission is to help those organizations develop healthy cultures that drive their success in the marketplace through attracting and retaining top talent, increasing employee engagement, and reducing customer churn. Now, to find out how she and her team at Silk Mountain accomplish all of this and more, Melissa Porterfield joins me today on CUTV News for an exclusive interview. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us here on CUTV News. An honor and a pleasure to have you here.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
You've come up from beautiful Houston, Texas, where you make your home. You've been in human resources, HR, and that world for well over 20 years, so you're a seasoned veteran and expert. Mm-hmm. What first initially inspired you to want to get into HR?
Yeah, so my first job out of college was teaching elementary school. And I taught for 8 years. I taught reading. And then I was encouraged by my principal to consider going into administration, which I actually hadn't thought about. But I got my master's degree, and while I was working on it, I got hired as an assistant principal at a new, what we call a magnet school, where children from all over the school district could come. It had special programs, gifted and talented, fine arts, math and science. And so I was tasked with hiring the teachers for this brand new school, and I handled a lot of the HR kinds of things. I did a lot of staff development with teachers, so a lot of teaching of teachers, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And so I was an assistant principal for 3 years, and I decided I really wanted to go into the private sector. So my first job in the private sector was an HR manager for a manufacturing company in Austin. And that's how I got my start. Fell in love with it.
And you were with them for a long time, that company?
I was with them for about 3 years. I was living in Austin, and that's when things were really booming, and tech was really booming, and so moved around some while I lived there, and then I moved back to Houston in 2012.
So what was it about HR specifically that spoke to you? Because you're dealing with the employees directly, you're dealing with management, right. You're sort of that go-between in between those two worlds and sort of bringing them together, the needs of each. Yeah. So what was it about that spoke to you as a person?
What I always tell employees, and what I always tell companies I work for, is that if I had to break it down into percentages, it's 51% for the company, because of course I have their interest to protect, but it's 49% for you as an employee. So I'm here to have your back when you need it. I'm here to help you when you need it. I'm also here to talk to you when something happens. Mm-hmm. So understand that that's how that's going to work. I've really enjoyed a lot of the learning and development that I did. I've done a lot of leadership development, helping leadership teams get better, training a lot of new managers. And so that part of it really spoke to me a lot. Now, there were other parts of HR that I wasn't that crazy about, but like benefits, not my thing, but I certainly did it because it was part of my job.
Now, I mentioned in the introduction, which probably surprises a lot of people, about 70%, according to recent research, 70% of employees are relatively disengaged. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a number of reasons. One of the main reasons that employees are disengaged is because they're not passionate about what they're doing, or they don't see meaning in their work. There are others that are there just to punch the clock, right? Frankly, they want a job, they want a salary, and so they're flying under the radar and they're doing the minimum that they can. And then you have other employees that are disengaged, that are angry with the company for some reason. Something's happened, they've been treated poorly by a manager, they haven't gotten the support that they needed, and they're just not happy. And so one of the main things that we have a responsibility to do as leaders and as HR professionals is to find out what's going on. And so I used to do quite a bit of that when I was in corporate HR.
I mentioned too also that over 50% are sort of looking for other work on the company's dime.
They are.
And that doesn't make for a healthy scenario. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that's an interesting statistic. And a lot of people are pretty shameless about talking about it, to their peers. Well, I don't like it here, my manager is this or that, I'm looking for something else. Certainly IT departments have the capability of seeing what employees are doing, and so you can see who's on LinkedIn, and you can see who's on Indeed, and you can see who's applying for things if they care to look. So that's a large number, and the fact that they're doing it at work is really disheartening, and it certainly impacts the company from a financial and productivity standpoint.
Slows everything down.
It really does.
Loyalty and teamwork sort of disappears too.
Yeah, and it erodes the morale of the rest of the team as well. If you've got someone that's complaining so bitterly and saying that they want to go work somewhere else.
I would imagine too, working in human resources, it's not always the easiest job because sometimes you are tasked with having to deliver news that perhaps isn't going to be very favorable for that employee due to whatever downsizing, mergers, acquisitions, things the employee themselves did or did not do. That's got to be tough.
It's really difficult, especially if you have a downsizing or a layoff, because those are people who have been doing a good job. There's not any reason from a performance standpoint. It's just the circumstances, and that is most especially difficult. And I'll tell you, the first one that I ever had to do was 6 weeks before Christmas. And this was
seems to be
back
always
in
around that time.
Yeah, and it was devastating from a personal standpoint. But of course, you have to maintain your professionalism. So.
So that's tough. So when there are layoffs and things of that nature, or even a sale of a business or whatever goes on, but some of the upside too. Did you ever feel that sometimes like you're a psychologist as well? You've had to really sort of figure things out in the best interests of all parties involved?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've always been able to do easily is establish relationships with people, no matter what level they were in the organization. So I would have employees, whether they were on the leadership team, whether they were working in a individual contributor position, would come into my office and talk to me about things that were going on in the company. So yes, a lot of times I did feel like I was a psychologist or a counselor and giving advice on things. But I enjoy that. So that was a part of my job I really liked when I was in corporate.
So we're talking about a span of some 20 plus years you've done this. How has the industry changed, positively, negatively, whatever it may be? How do you feel it's changed since you first got into the world of HR?
Well, I think it's gotten a lot more compliance focused, just with everything that's been going on that we've all seen in the media, the Me Too movement, all of the sexual harassment claims that are coming forward. So it's a lot more focused on compliance and it's always been compliance focused, but a lot more so now, I would say. Some of the other changes that I've seen are the more experienced HR people are getting out of corporate for whatever reason. Maybe they've been laid off, maybe they've decided to go their own direction, maybe they're retiring. And so the people that they're bringing on board aren't necessarily terribly experienced, and HR is extremely complicated and complex, and I don't think people really understand that if they haven't actually worked in it. No. So it's changing from the standpoint of more junior people doing very complex, complicated jobs without necessarily having the experience. And so some of the consulting work that I do is to mentor and train younger HR folks that are just coming into the field on what and how to do it.
What are some common mistakes that you see happen within companies within the world of HR?
One of the biggest mistakes that I see that is going to sound very nitpicky to the audience, but is that people are misclassified from a salary standpoint. And so you have a certain group of people based on the job that they do that should be making overtime. Mm-hmm. And then you have another group of people based on the job that they do that should be making a salary and not making overtime. It's very common for companies to get those mixed up. And so you potentially have people that are overtime eligible classified in the wrong area, which can cause a lot of problems for sure for the company, and of course the employees aren't happy about it when they find out about it either. And so that's one of the things that you really have to watch. Not the most compelling, exciting thing in the world, but definitely something that happens a lot.
And again, it's one of those great bits of information that you're able to work with companies on, because you've created this company, Silk Mountain, this boutique agency based in Houston. Tell us a little bit about going from working directly on the front lines of HR to then sort of pulling away from that immediate hands-on and creating this boutique agency that specializes in working with people in that world.
Yeah, so it's been a great journey. It was certainly a scary leap to make because you don't know what's at the bottom of the cliff. But I've enjoyed it a lot, and one of the things that I really like about it is my ability to actually influence what leadership's doing. One of the things that I found when I was internal is that I could sit down with the CEO and bring up some issues, and that person may not necessarily have listened to me quite as much as they do now as I'm coming in as a consultant and saying the very same thing, but actually getting somebody to really listen and buy in and react positively to solutions that I'm offering.
So when you created Silk Mountain, what was your vision, your dream in creating Silk Mountain? What did you want to bring to the table that perhaps didn't exist previously?
Sure. So I think that my 20 years of corporate HR experience gives me a really interesting vantage point into company culture, because I've always been in the guts of the company, and I've seen a lot of cultures over the years, and some of them have been good and some of them haven't been. And I've seen the workings behind why that is. And so I wanted to take that experience and specifically focus on company culture and work with leadership teams on either designing a culture that was going to be very conducive to them being successful, or to help an existing company transform a culture that maybe wasn't serving them terribly well.
So is Silk Mountain individually you, or do you have a team of people working with you as well?
So I am the CEO. It is my company. I do have what we call a bench of other consultants and people that I can go to for specific things if I need to, but I don't have any other employees. I plan to keep it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I may
more
hire
personalized approach too, more hands-on.
Yeah.
I think you're able to provide personalized service.
That's right. That's right.
So tell us about Silk Mountain in terms of some of the incredible things that you do.
Okay. So one of the things that I'm very passionate about doing is working with entrepreneurs and startups. That's my first love. And it's great. I get to go in and I get to start with somebody that's in the very nascent stage of launching their business. So they're getting everything ready. And they usually haven't thought about culture because they're busy. And I can relate because I'm an entrepreneur. I'm busy. I get it. But what happens typically is we'll have the conversation. They'll go, oh, yeah, I'll think about that. I'll think about that. And then it comes time to hire their first person, and they call me in a panic. Well, I'm ready to hire, and I'm not sure, how to do it, what to do. I don't want to make the wrong hire. And I'll say, well, there's a number of people out there that are going to have the skills and experience that you need for the job, but how are you going to know that they align with you?
Right.
And that really gets the wheels turning. And so then we can go back and we can really talk about the vision and why they exist. I believe that companies exist for two different reasons. Occasionally there's a company that exists for both, but a company exists either to change the world or to make people's lives better. And I think when I explain that to somebody in those terms, it really gets them thinking, because I'll ask them, which one's yours?
Now, has that changed at all, those two things that you just listed? Was there a time when the purpose predominantly was to make money?
I think that there was certainly a time, and even if you ask employees today, they'll tell you, oh, well, the purpose of my company is to make money. And the answer is, well, no, that's really a byproduct of doing it right. So if you're focusing on having a company and business just to make money, your employees aren't going to be very happy, and your customers are probably not going to be very happy. So it's really a matter of digging down and digging deep and thinking back, why did we originally do this?
It's out of a passion and a desire and things of that nature, which really make a difference. So in your desire to help people, especially startups, entrepreneurs, because you work with folks at all levels too, even seasoned companies, but specifically the entrepreneurs, those startups, like you said, you're guiding them not just in the HR part of things, but also in sort of taking that dream and making it more standardized, streamlined, focused, getting a plan and then sticking with it and going, constantly making moves that go forward in a positive way, right?
Right, absolutely. And what I find with startups is their first hire is usually not a leader. It's them and somebody to actually do the work, right? So if we can get that right, if we could get those things defined and articulated and get that first person on board that's in alignment, then they get it, they get the feeling of it. When it becomes time to hire somebody in a leadership or management role, I always tell them, I said, this is the most key hire you're going to make. Because if that person isn't aligned with you, then you're really going to have issues. I find that a lot of people are unwilling to make the tough decision if they've hired somebody that doesn't fit. And I don't blame them, because it's really difficult. However, you've got somebody that's out of alignment with what you're trying to do, and it creates additional struggles. So if you do it right on the front end, then the chances of you having an issue on the back end are certainly diminished.
So a company that's already established, we're talking about the startups and entrepreneurial folks now, but maybe the next level would be the companies that are already flowing and maybe they've been around 10 years, 15 years or so. In that case, in that scenario, at what point would they bring a company like yours, like Silk Mountain, into play for them to help them?
Yeah, so the company that I mentioned a few minutes ago, the service organization, it was interesting when I met the CEO and he asked me what I did, and he said, I really want to talk to you more about that because I'm having problems. And so I met with him and he told me everything that was going on, and I said, yes, you are having problems, and it's certainly something that I can help you with.
But what kinds of problems would you be witness to, roughly?
Sure. So a lot of times it's the leadership team that's misaligned. Leaders have to be able to be vulnerable with each other. They have to have a lot of clarity around what they're doing. They have to be on the same page. They have to be marching to the same tune and exhibiting the same behaviors. And so if there's any kind of dysfunctionality there, it's going to flow over to the employees, because employees watch everything that the leaders do and everything that their managers do. And they make a lot of judgments about the company based on that. So it's extremely important, if a company's large enough, to have a leadership team to make sure that they are locked tight with each other.
How do you define for you what a good leader is? I've interviewed a number of people who are leadership coaches, executive leadership coaches, things of that nature, and they're talking about this shift in the role of the leader of a company or whatever it may be, from going from that boss up in the top of the skyscraper who didn't necessarily engage with the rest of the staff or the employees, and then the employees on the front lines had their vision of what the boss was like. But now some of them they're rolling up their sleeves and they're getting more engaged, and they're bringing more perspective and ideas from the staff, from the employees at all levels of the company into play, and listening to some of their ideas and their dreams and hopes and aspirations. Do you see that shift happening, and would somebody that does that in their company define one of the elements of being a great leader?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that a great leader can have is influence. And it shouldn't be influence because they're sitting on the top of the heap. It's influence because they know how to engage with people. They know how to listen. They know how to take other people's ideas. They're not married to their own thinking. Another aspect, I think, of a great leader is servant leadership. And so what I mean by that is that that person exists to help others be successful. And it seems like a bit of a paradox, but it actually works very well. When you've got somebody that has that mentality about them, that is saying, you know what, it's our company, I'm here to help make you successful, help make it successful. And so those two are big differences that I've seen over the years.
What's another element that would make for a great leader, you think, that you've seen as things have changed, as societal changes, cultural differences, just the way business is conducted these days?
I think another thing that makes a great leader is somebody that's willing to pull the employees in and get their ideas. And that is conscious of diversity, appreciates diversity. You know, not only diversity in the way that we would normally think about it, you know, people from different areas of the country or different countries or whatever, but also people that have a diversity of thought, because it's very easy to get caught up in your own view of the world, and it's so much more helpful to bring people in that can say, well, wait a minute, let's look at it this way.
Are we in a leadership crisis right now?
Yes.
So how do you define what that is?
So I think that the biggest way that you would define the crisis that we're seeing right now is the changing of the old guard to the new guard. And I know that there are a lot of people that are baby boomers in leadership positions, and they're getting ready to retire. They don't necessarily have a good bench of people coming up behind them to take over. And I'm not saying that a lot of the old guard were necessarily great leaders, although there are definitely great leaders out there. But they're not really investing in the people coming up. They're not doing the leadership development. They're not doing the leadership training to help them get ready to go. So one of the things that I'm starting to see in companies is this concept that we call distributed leadership. And so in order to keep up with the changes that are going on in the world right now, that old school thinking of the hierarchy where you have the CEO at the top and you have the cascading layers of management has to go away. And we're seeing it in matrixed organizations, which can be a little bit confusing. But distributed leadership means that you don't necessarily have to be in an official leadership position to still exert that influence and that leadership ability with your team. So it's spreading it out, it's making it more equal. It requires the leader to give up some of their ego and check it at the door and understand that they're not the smartest person in the room, and that there are other people that can contribute equally well.
And overall, that makes for a healthier environment and more productive environment, because then everybody is invested in the success of their work and the success of the company as a whole, right?
Yeah, it's a very radical shift that we see happening. There's not a lot of companies that have adopted it yet, but I believe that they will be. I think it's the wave of the future.
Are there any companies where that scenario wouldn't work? Any sort of a structure where, would that be maybe a family business or something, or?
I could see in a family-owned business that perhaps it wouldn't work that well, but I would also suggest to that company that they think about it, because at some point the patriarch or matriarch of the family, whoever is at the top that's running it, isn't going to be running it anymore.
Right, exactly.
So.
Time passes. So we talked a little bit about cultural issues within a company, company atmosphere. Tell us a little bit about what cultural issues would possibly come up.
Sure. So I think the biggest issue that we see in companies is that people aren't aware of what the company wants to be all about or should be all about. So if you were to talk to even a leadership team or a number of employees and ask them to articulate the vision of the company, probably wouldn't be able to do it. You would certainly have employees to say, oh, well, the vision is to make money.
To make money, right, right.
Yeah. And then some other areas where I think that there are a lot of cultural issues come from a value standpoint. So if you have lots of pretty words on your wall that say, we're collaborative, we have integrity, we do this, we do that.
Honesty, loyalty, dedication.
All of those good things. But you're seeing behaviors displayed across the organization, especially from leadership.
That aren't matching that. We
You've got
care
a problem.
about you.
Yeah. You've got a big problem. I read a book recently that was really interesting. It was about the best places to work, and it was written by the organization that founded that Best Places to Work. And they said that every company that has been on the list, their foundation has been trust.
So it was listed by company? They actually broke down company names.
Oh, yeah.
Did it also break down industries too? What are some of the more favorable industries to be in?
You know, it's really interesting. If you look at it, and Forbes puts out a list every year of the top companies to work for, best companies, and they're kind of industry agnostic. You know, it can be. I've seen companies on there that have been really surprising to me.
Yeah.
But based on their research, and they've done a lot of it, it's trust. And if they can build that foundation of trust and build their values on top of that, then they're well positioned. I think that there's a lot to be learned from that.
Too often, I would imagine that highly productive employees are often promoted into positions where they don't necessarily have that expertise or that skill set. Tell us about that and what happens then.
Let's say you have someone that's a great software engineer, and he's just doing so well, and they decide, oh, this person's going to be a great manager, we're going to give him a team. Or
a spokesperson, or out there talking to people.
Yeah, and they tank because it's not their skill set. They haven't gotten support, they haven't gotten development, they haven't necessarily even asked the person if that's what they want to do. And so they struggle. And so without that support, without that development, and without those opportunities, maybe it's coaching, maybe it's classes, maybe it's both, it really puts that person at a disadvantage, which is unfortunate.
What are some of the questions? So give us an idea of when Silk Mountain is called in to work with the startup, the entrepreneur, individual, corporation, whatever it may be. What are some of those straightforward first questions that you'll ask? Take us maybe through the beginning steps of that relationship.
Sure.
Like you said, building trust between you and them and you is essential. But what are some of the other things that occur from there?
Sure. So when I sit down with somebody for the first time, after we've gotten to know each other a little bit, and I've learned a lot about their business, and they've learned about my business, then we get down to brass tacks. And the first thing I'll ask them is, what's the vision for your company, and can you articulate that with clarity? And some people can, some people can't. I always tell them, you know what, it's okay if you can't, because this is definitely something I can help you with. Another question I will ask somebody at the beginning of what I call the discovery process is, if you had to name the biggest problem that you're having in your company right now, what would that be? And that's a really good springboard to start asking other questions. And I'm a questioner, and that's how I do a lot of my work, is through asking, and then pulling in opinions from different people in the organization, and then we can come up with some recommendations and some solutions.
Are you working specifically just with individuals, companies, organizations in the United States, or do you go beyond our borders?
Sure. So currently my business is U.S. specific. However, one of my big dreams is to expand internationally. I'd like to do that within the next 5 years. So it's a big dream, but it's out there.
Now, with that comes different ways of doing business and different cultural influences, international law, things of that nature, which we talked about at dinner. That brings in a whole new scenario and a lot of different elements to that game, right?
It does. It definitely does. Now I have international HR experience in my background, which is helpful, but it definitely wouldn't be something that I could do by myself. So, built on my own foundation of trust with my company, I would have to go and find like-minded people that were in different countries that could help with the actual consulting piece of it, although I would stay very involved with it.
no matter whether it's international or in the United States, in terms of being able to effectively lead, going a little bit back towards that leadership area, really being your authentic self is a key ingredient to being an effective leader, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I use a specific meeting with people that are coming to work with me that I share with my clients as part of my services, and it's called a mutual expectations meeting. And in that particular meeting, the whole goal of it is to find out how somebody operates and to let them know how I operate. So the first question is about candor. You know, how candid do you want me to be with you? And here's how candid I want you to be with me and what that looks like.
Do you find sometimes in the beginning that they are more willing to be more candid with you and would rather you weren't as candid with them, or the other way around?
Well, you know, that's a really interesting question because I have them rated on a scale of 1 to 10, and I'm an extremely direct person. So with me, I want people to be 100% candid. 10, absolutely.
Don't hold back.
Don't hold back. Just tell me what's on your mind. I get a lot of employees like, oh yes, I want to be a 10 too. And it's like, okay, well, let's talk about what that really looks like. Because if I'm going to be at a level 10 of candor with you, we're going to just sit down and have a very straightforward conversation. Professionally, I'm going to be nice about it, but we're not going to mince words. We're just going to talk about it, you know, whatever it is. And I find employees that will kind of backpedal a little bit and go, you know, maybe I want a softer approach, which is fine. I mean, that's the purpose of
Bedside manner.
Yeah, and I don't think I have a bad bedside manner, but it's just a matter of changing the way you message information so that somebody can hear it and take it in and process it and then use it effectively without feeling like they've been talked to very directly.
Lecture that. So do you...
Well, I don't lecture.
Right, which is perfect. Do you adjust... How individualized do you make? I mean, obviously what you do has a lot of background and formulation to it and structure, but I'm sure you tweak and adjust it based on the personalities you're dealing with,
Absolutely.
the culture, the environment. So you'll approach different things different ways with the same material and the same bottom line approach and striving for that effectiveness, but at the same time you might alter it a little bit based on what you're seeing in front of you.
Right. And so there's been a lot of work on that. It's actually called leadership styles. And so I definitely adapt mine because I can be pretty hard driving, and that's certainly not how I want to be with people at all. So I do adapt my style based on what they want. Now, if I've got somebody that says, you know what, I want you to be as candid with me as I would be with you, then we're going to just have a straight up conversation, and we're not going to wrap anything in a fluffy pink ball. We're just going to talk about it. If I have somebody that does not want that high level of candor, then I'm going to adjust my communication style to one where they can feel comfortable hearing what I have to say. Although I still want them to be 100% candid with me. So, but yeah, it changes. And the whole purpose of that exercise, and the reason that I like to give it to leaders that I'm working with as clients, is because it really builds a foundation of trust between you and an employee. And then the very last part of it are the expectations that the leader has for that employee, and they're very specific. But by the time you get to the expectations page, that employee's feeling very comfortable with you. And it kind of cuts down on that whole honeymoon period and gets to the heart of the matter.
To the heart of the matter. So are you predominantly working with the leaders of the companies, the management of the companies? Are you working also with employees? Do they have you sometimes brought in to work with everybody collectively?
I won't do a culture transformation without pulling employees in. Because if it's developed by the CEO and he says, from now on, thou shalt be this, you know, it's not going to fly. So we really need to, I do a lot of focus groups with employees. I'll have focus groups with the leadership team, with the managers, with the employees. Then I'll mix them up so that we can really start getting a good dialogue going. And then when we get ready to roll it out, we've got that buy-in already. And a lot of times the employees have better ideas. So it's important to get that feedback from everyone.
What do you think makes your approach unique and different, your perspective? Of course, coming from 20 years on the front lines in human resources, that's a big bonus, a big plus. But what else do you think makes your particular approach and effectiveness unique and special? What other elements of your approach stand out?
So I have the ability to establish rapport with people very easily, and it doesn't matter what level of employee they are or where they work in the company. It's something that I've always been able to do, and I certainly use that to help get people engaged in conversations. I find that people are willing to be very honest with me, and I know how to keep confidentiality. So if an employee is talking to me about something specific that's going on, I can couch it in such a way that they don't have to be worried that they're going to get ratted out or whatever. So I think that's part of it, is just my style in general.
Let's talk a little bit about something called voluntary turnover. What is that?
Okay. So voluntary turnover is where the employee decides on their own that they want to leave. And it's interesting because almost every company does exit interviews where they sit down with a person and they say, okay, why are you leaving? And they have this series of questions. Good companies always ask, what could we have done to keep you? And, would you recommend the company to friends and family? And people aren't necessarily honest about that. Nobody wants to burn a bridge. So the way that I generally find out why somebody's really left is water cooler talk. And because I've been able to establish relationships with people in the organization, I can find out what was really going on and why they really left the organization. And voluntary turnover is not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes you have someone that's not a high performer that knows that the eyes of management are upon them and decides to make their move on their own. But where we really get concerned is when our high performers are walking out the door. And
that's saying something about the company?
Yes,
the
I think
atmosphere, the environment, the approach.
Yeah. And there's two data points that are so important for companies to be thinking about that often get buried in the leadership report monthly meeting, however often they have it. And one of them is their voluntary turnover. What's that percentage? And then the other one is level of engagement of employees. But with the voluntary turnover, actually either one of them, you need to follow the data.
Mm-hmm.
You really need to dig. You need to find out why. So if you have a group of employees that are leaving the same manager or the same team, you need to look into that. Or if you've got people that are leaving after 2 years or 3 years, maybe they're not getting the growth opportunities that they need in order to progress in their careers. And so leaders really need to be paying attention to those two data points.
How'd you come up with the name Silk Mountain? What does that mean to you? There's a deeper meaning to that, isn't there?
There is. So Silk Mountain is actually the English translation of my family name. And when I was looking to name my business, I knew I didn't want it to be Porterfield Consulting or Porterfield Services or anything like that. I wanted it to be something that stood out, that was different. What I didn't realize at the time was how many questions I would get about the name, because you're not the first person that's asked me that. And I've been asked, what it means.
Almost sounds like a movie production company or something. Silk Mountain.
Silk Mountain, yeah.
Yeah, Productions.
And I've had people read meaning into it. They're like, oh, this is great because part of it's soft and part of it's solid. And I was like,
Silk Mountain.
Yeah. So it's been interesting from that standpoint.
And that probably describes elements of you too.
Yeah, it does.
Doesn't it?
Although I wasn't thinking about it at the time. Yeah.
See? Another important thing too, of course, is employee engagement. And we've been threading our conversation around a lot of that. But that is really vital. Employees do need to feel like they're heard, they're engaged, because when they are, I would imagine the productivity level then rises, and like you say, the gravy of it, of the making the money, that rises, which pleases shareholders, things of that nature. But also then the quality of whatever the product is that's being produced will be higher. So there's so many benefits to employee engagement as well, right?
Absolutely. Employee engagement has been getting a lot of press for years now, and to the point where people are getting a little jaded about it because I don't think they necessarily really understand what it means. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but...
Is it because of the rush to get the work done, because we're in a faster society? Get it out, we got to get it done, we got to move on to the next thing, that time isn't being taken to delve into that as much?
Well, that's part of it, but a lot of it is, people look at these very successful tech companies and they think, oh, well, if I bring lunch in every day for the employees, or if I have ping pong tables or a meditation
and skateboards
room, or pool tables or whatever
right.
the perk is, then my employees are going to be more engaged. And that's not true. Employees are going to be more engaged when they see leadership that's engaged with them, and they see leadership that's walking the talk, and they see leadership that's very clear and very cohesive on what they're doing. And that's what really helps with employee engagement.
Now, it's one thing I would imagine to design a culture, and then another thing to actually install it, right?
Yes, it is. So designing the culture, I wouldn't say it's easy because it takes a lot of thought, and it takes a lot of tweaking and writing and rewriting and discussion. But actually getting it out into an organization that already exists is definitely challenging. One of the ways that I suggest that companies do that is find out who their influencers are in the company. And they're not necessarily in formal leadership positions. They're employees that have a lot of influence, a lot of, power is the wrong word, but maybe they're charismatic. People look to them for their opinion on things. They're early adopters of change. And they're very important to get on board with the shift that's happening, to help be messengers and carry that out into the employee population. It helps a lot.
Bottom line for you, you really have, it's almost like a twofold vision, like you described earlier, in wanting to improve the lives of employees, as well as sort of create this environment within the company where everybody is thriving and growing as well, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely my vision. Yep.
And what I like too is the fact that, you're so devoted and dedicated to this. I'm sure you have success stories that you could share with us where the company you worked with, whether it's startup or a company that's existed many years, was at sort of this point and you were able to take them to the next level through your work.
Absolutely. So I have a startup. I love all my clients. So I just want to make that clear. I love them all.
That's
They're
officially
great.
made known. She loves them all.
I love them all. But there's a startup that I work with that really just touches my heart. The CEO of this particular organization is a scientist, and she's worked with immunotherapy for years to help treat cancer in people. And she had 2 dogs in her family die of cancer, and she, during the course of her research, discovered that using immunotherapy to treat people for cancer also works for dogs. And apparently it works for other animals. We had to really narrow her focus because when she wanted to start her company, and she'd actually thought about a lot of this before she brought me on board, she realized that she couldn't treat every type of animal in the world, so she decided to focus on dogs first.
So you have this twofold vision that you obviously want to improve the lives of employees, but also, while at the same time, helping companies create this environment where everybody can grow.
Absolutely. I've learned a lot of things in my 20 years of in HR, and one of them is that employees should be enjoying their jobs most of the time. We're all going to have our days. But if you've got people that are coming to work that are excited about what they're doing, that find meaning in it, it makes such a huge difference. And so that's absolutely part of my vision.
Do you ever meet, little devil's advocate, do you ever meet any resistance where maybe the management is all for it, the employee isn't, or vice versa. The employees want to have these great ideas, but the management doesn't want to change. And then you have to come in and sort of create a level playing field and sort of be that negotiator and bring everybody together so it works out equitably, fairly for all.
Definitely.
That was a very confident, definitely.
That was a very confident,
been
definitely.
there, done that multiple
yes.
times. Yeah.
So a lot of what happens with employees that are resistant to changing is that kind of, oh, here we go again mentality, you know, where management has thrown so many changes at them over the years that they're just like, yeah, right, here we go again. We're going to throw something against the wall and see if it sticks. Yeah.
Right.
So you certainly see a jaded population sometimes, especially in a company that's tried to change a lot of things quickly. It's very difficult. On the flip side, you can have a leadership team that doesn't think that there's a problem, or thinks that if they put two beanbag chairs and a ping pong table in the break room, they're going to be Google and it's all going to be great. So it takes a lot of conversation, a lot of finesse, and sometimes being very direct and just saying, look, you know, you've got a problem. Your people are leaving, your people aren't engaged, and you know, your customer churn is up. You've got customers that are leaving you and not, you know, as happy with you as they were before.
And that's how you define customer churn, is that they are no longer buying the product or no longer coming to that company for whatever it is they offer.
Exactly, yeah. And customer loyalty is kind of going by the wayside these days, right?
Yeah.
There's so much competition anyway, and so it becomes that much more critical to hold on to your customer base.
How about the whole online world that's now happening, where we're moving away a little bit from the bricks and mortar way of doing things to everything happening? Not everything. Certain industries, obviously, you can't, or it's just not conducive for it to be.
Right.
But a lot of industries are moving to this online approach where we're clicking and swiping, and that's it, that human connection, that interaction with that person, whether it's a customer service person that helps you or whoever, is sliding away. How is that changing everything for companies, for people, for engagement, for relationships with the public, from your perspective?
Sure. So a lot of the online companies, if you think about it, are really consumer related, and people will jump for price very easily, including me. And when I'm shopping, I look on Amazon, I look on eBay, I figure out, you know, which one's the best deal, and it doesn't really matter that much about the person behind the scenes. Not that they're not important, folks at Amazon, you are, but I think that, you know, I'm representative of a typical consumer. Behind the online presence is where you still really have to look at the people side of the business, because I think that employees that work in that kind of environment do feel disconnected from the customer. They're not having that relationship. And so it becomes even more critical for them to be getting support and gratification from inside the company, and knowing that they have a culture that's going to provide them with support that they need to continue to grow and be happy where they are.
Tell me a little bit about you from your own personal background. You describe yourself as an Air Force brat. You have traveled all over with your family, being in the Air Force. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. So my father was in the Air Force, and I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts. And about 6 months later, moved to Madrid and lived there for 4 years. Came back to the States. I've lived in numerous states. Ended up in Texas. Went to college there. Decided I wanted to live in a big city next to an ocean. Had never been to Houston before, and I will tell all of you that haven't been there before, Houston is actually a great city. It gets bad press sometimes, but it's wonderful. Unfortunately, the ocean that I was hoping for was not the ocean that I got. So Galveston is certainly not the prettiest beach in the U.S., but I love living in Houston and have been there a long time. So
So how do you feel, having had this international flavor at an early age too, how do you feel that enhances the work you do? Because you are in a people business.
Yes, I'm a curious person, and I'm an adventurous person, and I'm somebody who loves to learn all the time. And so I have just really avid curiosity about other cultures, other countries. I love to travel. I'm a scuba diver, so there are
cool.
parts of the world that I'm very interested in
Still would
going
like
to,
right?
so I can do some diving and meet the people that are there. So.
And also, you're increasing the speaking engagements that you're going to be doing as well,
Yeah.
not only in the United States, Canada, but globally.
Yes, absolutely. It's one of my goals.
So you would like to go into companies and do a speaking engagement specific to a company, or do it sort of in a large venue where representatives and people from a variety of different industries and companies come to hear your message?
I like both, actually. When I go into a company, of course, it's a much more intimate situation. Tends to be almost more of a seminar format.
Right.
If I'm speaking to a larger, more mixed group, then I make it as much like a seminar as I can. But you can't. It's very difficult to have that interaction between people in the audience in a larger setting.
Yeah, the intimacy, right?
The intimacy, right. But I still want to get my message out there. I still want to talk to people about the importance of company culture and what it looks like when you've got a good one in place and what it looks like when you don't.
There's a number of people who do that work in terms of speaking engagements as well, who are well known, but that you've always looked towards Ken Blanchard, John Maxwell, Marshall Goldsmith, who I've personally interviewed. He's actually been in this studio.
Yeah.
Some really, really great ones. And also this gentleman here with this book called The Advantage, and you brought
Yes.
this here to the studio. What is it about his work, define him a little bit for us, that stands out in particular for you and this book as well, The Advantage?
Yeah. So I have, as you mentioned, I have a lot of leadership consultants, writers, speakers that have been very influential on my thinking and my work. Out of all of them, Patrick Lencioni is my hero. So Patrick, I hope you're watching this. He has such a great way of getting his message across. A lot of his books are stories. And one of my favorites is a book called Death by Meeting, and it's a story of a guy who has just sold his company, and he has very ineffective meetings. And it talks about exactly what that looks like and what a good meeting should look like. And so it's a small book, it's short. By the time you're finished with it, you're like, oh, I just read this really interesting story, and wow, I learned a lot of stuff. Well, The Advantage is written differently, and it is not a series of stories like his other work is. It's all very practical advice. His stories are practical as well, but this takes the concept of organizational health, which is such a big part of what I do, and talks about different areas of organizational health and how you should have a very cohesive leadership team, what that looks like, how you get it there, the questions that you ask. And then it talks a lot about clarity. So it's clarity of message, it's clarity of understanding from the employees, and it's just making sure that you're tight yourselves, that you understand, you help each other, and that you're getting that out there to the employees. And if you're healthy from a leadership standpoint, then your organization is going to have a much better culture. And so what was interesting is when I started my business, if you look at my website, it says a healthy organization is the foundation of a great culture. I hadn't even read this book yet. I hadn't heard about it. And someone that I respect very much asked me if I'd read his latest book. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know there was one. Shame on me. And I read it and absolutely loved it. So.
Speaking of books, I hear, a little birdie whisper in my ear, that you are working on a book, considering putting a book out as well.
I am.
What's that process like for you? It's a daunting process when you first get going.
Yeah, it is a daunting process. The book is called Alignment, and the premise is that if you have an established culture, then you should look at your branding strategy. And I'm not talking about the logo or the website or the brochure, but I'm talking about the actual strategy of how do you get your message
Right.
to the world, to your employees. So you align that. And then you look at your processes and you make sure that your processes are in alignment with your culture and your strategy, your branding strategy. And then the last piece of it, which is certainly extremely important, is your workspace design. And so everything should, this is why it's called alignment, because everything should be in alignment. I should be able to walk into a company, you should be able to walk into a company and get a real feel for what it's like based on what it looks like. Even smell's a part of it, which is so interesting.
Yeah, the aroma and the scent. Right?
Yeah. And so anyway, that's it. It is daunting. I was hoping to have it done this year. That's not going to happen.
You're taking time to make
Yep.
sure it's done right.
Shooting
and
for next year.
That's it. That's
And,
fantastic.
really
Keep moving
excited
forward.
about it. Yeah.
What are some of the things when you look at your life's journey and your experience in this career pursuit you've had, where you've worked with so many different people and continue to, what are some of the things you love about, you're passionate about in this work that you do?
Passionate about a lot of it, actually. It's why I get up in the morning. I love what I do. And being able to go into an organization and help them change for the better is so incredibly gratifying. And being able to help people have better lives at work is so incredibly gratifying, because we spend more time at work than we do with our families. And when people get home at the end of the day, they shouldn't be ready to kick the cat, right? They should be happy to be home, happy to see their families, happy to be doing whatever they're doing, because they've had a meaningful day. And so that's a lot of what drives me.
The future of Silk Mountain, the work that you're doing, tell us about some possible exciting things that you're working on, things that you want to do in the future with the company.
Well, like I mentioned, I do want to expand internationally. Certainly want to grow the company, work a lot more outside of Texas than I have been. Get into Canada, nice, our neighbors up north, and really just expand, do a lot more seminars, a lot more public speaking or professional speaking, I should say, engagements.
If somebody's watching right now and they are on the cusp of either starting a company, they're a startup, they're putting their ideas together, or they are a company that's been around for a while, or maybe they're a company that's very well known and established and they've been around decades, what would you suggest, what little tidbit of advice would you give them in terms of making that initial connection with a company like yours and bringing in your consultancy?
Yeah, so by all means, check out my website. You can certainly get a hold of me there. I'm on LinkedIn. I have a Facebook page, so there's ways to get a hold of me there. My number's on my website. Call me. I'm very approachable.
Exactly.
And would love to talk to you.
What would be a good trigger for them? When is the time that they should bring you in?
Well, that depends on the stage of the company.
Yeah.
So if you're a startup, bring me in on the front end and let me help you get your culture designed. Don't wait until you're in a panic to hire the first person.
And that happens too often, right?
Very often, because and a lot of times a startup will make a less than great hire because they need somebody and they need them now.
Right.
And so
to just bring them in.
They'll grab the warm body that can do what they think they can do.
Who said, I'll do it, but the skill set might not be there, the passion might not be there.
Exactly.
Right.
So if you're a startup, call me now.
And the mid-level, the company that's been going for a while,
if it's
same thing?
If you're seeing your voluntary turnover going up, and you're seeing your employee engagement going down, and you're seeing customer churn, it's time to give me a call.
And a company that's well-heeled, that's been in it for a long time, and that perhaps is stuck where they see technology and the world and society changing around them, and they don't know how to adapt to that. We're seeing that in retail, we're seeing that in some other areas. This well-heeled company, legendary names, Sears going through that, a lot of companies, Pennies. Time for them to make contact as well.
Yeah, absolutely. happy to come in and see what I can do. You know, I know that some of those companies are on the brink of huge changes.
Yeah.
And I do have a lot of change management experience in my background and can certainly help work through those kinds of issues as well.
What brings you the greatest joy about the work you do?
Culture. Absolutely. You know, being able to, it's so gratifying to see a new culture born, and it's so gratifying to see a culture transformed that's making such a difference. And I know I go on and on and on about culture, but it's truly my passion.
Well, you're making a difference too, and you're making a huge impact in such a positive way, Melissa.
We
thank you very much for joining us and coming here to the studio to share your experience, your successes, and how much you want, the passion that you have to want to work with individuals and companies to make things better, to bring them to the next level in a positive way where everybody's engaged, everybody is happy, fulfilled, and successful. And that's what it's all about. And finding that joy and love in the work that they're doing, like you said, that is making a difference in the lives of others.
Right. Well, I'm glad to be here, and I will say that it's very obvious that you have a passion for what you do.
Do I pass the snuff test?
You totally passed the snuff test. You know, it's obvious, right? And I know that your viewers see that the passion in what you do, and it's important. Life's short.
That's right.
We've got to love what we do.
Live your passion.
That's right.
Melissa Porterfield, you're the best. Thanks very much for joining us, and we wish you continued success with Silk Mountain and everything you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
It's been my pleasure.
Ours as well.
If you'd like to learn more about Silk Mountain's unique and effective system and what they can do for you, visit this website, silkmtn.com. That's silkmountain.com. For CUTV News, I'm Jim Masters. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.